brief interaction highlights another issue that's been popular in recent years, and one that I think is tripping people up in their search for fulfillment and success. It's the 10,000 hour rule. The rule suggests that if you put in 10,000 hours of practice into any skill that you want to get better at, you will achieve mastery. This rule implies that innate talent is irrelevant. But if that were true, if it only took 10,000 hours to master any skill you wanted to master, why do we see so many people saying things like, I need to get away from X profession, but 10 years in, I'm still struggling to figure out what I want to do. This 10,000 hour rule comes from the concept of deliberate practice from the performance psychology. Researchers studied elite athletes, musicians, and chess players who rose to fame. Their studies concluded that these individuals reached mastery because they trained at their craft for at least 10,000 hours. So no wonder that my client, who likely admires athletes, found it frustrating to think about spending only 20% of practice time on something that doesn't come naturally to the person. And when we hold the 10-hour rule as the ultimate path to success, it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to learn a profession, believing that at the end of those 10,000 hours, we will find that mastery, we will find that fulfillment and success. 10,000 hours is roughly equivalent to 5 years if you work on a skill 40 hours a week consistently, or 10 years if you work on it 20 hours per week consistently. So again, why are there people out there saying things like, I need to get away from this profession, but 10 years in, I'm still struggling to figure out what I want to do? Wouldn't you expect fulfillment after you have dedicated 10 years to a profession? Or clarity about what you should be doing? If you have been in a career that was not in full alignment with your natural innate talents to begin with, and if you have been following the unhelpful advice that tells you to be disciplined and turn your weaknesses into strengths, sadly, you cannot expect fulfillment. But here's the good news. Figuring out your innate talents and defining your dream job isn't as hard as it might seem. When you start viewing talent as your naturally recurring patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior productively applied, and discipline yourself to focus on what you are naturally great at instead of what doesn't come easily to you, everything changes. Trust me, this habit will be much easier to build because focusing on your strengths and finding work that brings you joy will only make you more motivated to keep going. But I have to warn you, there's another problem you will run into. Once your job is in alignment with your innate talents, the work will feel suspiciously easy. You will wonder, is this even work? Just like two of my clients put it. One said, my work feels stupid easy. And the other one said, my work doesn't feel like work, it feels like breathing. When your work feels as natural as breathing, it brings a new challenge. You might start questioning whether what you are doing is truly valuable. But yes, my friend, it absolutely is. The way your mind works is unique to you. No one else thinks or feels in quite the same way as you do. And it is your job to become so aware of how your mind operates and how you deliver excellence so that you can lean on that understanding whenever you start doubting yourself or when you start doubting the value of your work. In my coaching sessions, I help clients craft their zone of genius statement. This statement serves as a guide that they can refer to whenever doubts pop up. or when they get sidetracked by something they think they should be doing just because they have been doing it for years. Often, these tasks aren't in alignment with their innate talents, where they should be focusing most of their energy. Let me give you an example. One of my clients, Carol, a business architect, who is also my friend, said to me once, "I have always been great at my job, but I have been sort of oblivious to how I do what I do." She shared this during a time when she was frustrated with her employer, who wasn't assigning her the challenging projects she knew she could lead. She wanted to make a change, either by advocating for new opportunities with her current employer or by exploring other options. But without a clear understanding of what she brought to the table, she felt stuck. So we spent some time defining her zone of genius. First of all, she had built a reputation for figuring things out. People would say, "Go to Carol, Carol will figure this out." And indeed, people would come to her when they felt absolutely stuck with a project. And this is how we start her zone of genius statement. "People come to me with a problem they cannot solve. I gather information and analyze the problem. I then help them define a measurable desired outcome. Then I prepare a comprehensive strategy to get them to the desired outcome. After they sign off on the strategy, I oversee the execution and adjust the roadmap if issues arise." As we worked on her zone of genius statement, something fascinating happened. She started pushing back on one of the verbs that I used in her statement. She didn't feel comfortable with oversee the execution of a strategy and preferred to say execute the strategy. Execution, what she was accustomed to doing in addition to developing this strategy. But her talent profile suggests that if she focused on just strategy development rather than execution, she could tackle more projects for her consulting firm. This would ultimately bring in more revenue for the organization. In other words, the firm would see a higher return on investment if Carol stayed within her zone of genius, strategic thinking, and delegated project execution on her strategies to others. Years later, I shared Carol's story with another client, Linda, who was also exceptionally gifted in strategic thinking, but she kept getting caught up in these tedious tasks, as she called them. Earlier in our conversation, Linda had estimated that her employer lets her work in her zone of genius somewhere between 85 to 90% of the time. Sounds perfect, right? Linda must be in her dream job, right? But if that was true, why did she also mention that nearly every night she is working after hours on these tedious tasks that drain her and she finds herself procrastinating to do them? The reality is, it's easy to overlook the parts of your work that drain you when you love your employer and believe they're taking great care of you. But once we did an objective time study, it became clear that Linda's estimate of 85 to 90% was a little off. She had developed a bias because of her positive feelings toward her employer. Only when I shared Carol's story with Linda, how Carol had been so insistent on executing rather than overseeing strategies, did it finally click for Linda. She said to me, "I associate these two things so closely." In other words, she felt personally responsible for executing her own strategy instead of allowing herself to focus solely on defining strategies. But let's go back to Carol's story for a moment. When we crafted her zone of genius statement, she gained the clarity to truly understand how she does what she does. This insight made her realize she needed to make adjustments in her professional life to ensure her role aligned completely with her zone of genius. Remember how her former employer wasn't putting her on the projects she knew she could lead? She decided to leave, and her zone of genius statement helped her land a role where her unique strengths were recognized. her new employer not only assigned her to multiple high-stakes projects, they also gave her a significant raise, a more senior title, principal business architect, and even provided her with resources to hire team members so that she could delegate more. All of this happened in about 7 months of her starting with her new employer. None of this had been discussed during the interview, but because she was able to clearly articulate the value that she brings, her new employer quickly saw that enabling her to operate within her zone of genius would help their consultancy grow. And that's the power of clarity around your zone of genius. Not only do you get to do the work you love, but you also become more persuasive in asking for what you need to deliver excellence. Everybody wins.